Hello, this is our presentation on Chapter 2, Decision Making. And this chapter includes the following main ideas. My name is Wing, and we are going to jump right into the first part, that is the process of decision making. Decision is a choice among two or more alternatives, so decision making is typically described as choosing among options. However, it is not only choosing but require a whole process. In the step 1, we identify a problem. Problem is an obstacle that makes it difficult to achieve a desired goal or purpose. Every decision starts with a problem, a discrepancy between an existing and a desired condition. Then we identify the decision criteria, which means the factors that are important to resolving the problem. And then if the relevant criteria aren't equally important, the decision maker must weigh the items in order to give them correct priority. For example, a student may prefer an affordably priced laptop, while an officer may want their laptop to be higher quality and memory storage. The three next steps that are develop alternative, which means we will list out the list of many other options, and then we analyze those options in the step 5. What are some advantages and disadvantages of each options, and then we select the option that is best fit to our requirement. In step 7, we make purchase of the choice and convey the decision to those affected and get their commitment to it. And finally, we evaluate the result or outcomes of the decision to see if the problem was resolved. In case the problem wasn't resolved, we continue to find out the reasons, and this will likely to require us to start the whole process over.
Next, I will talk about approach to decision making. Decision making can be defined as the process of selecting a right and effective course of action from two or more alternatives for the purpose of achieving a desired result. Decision making is the essence of management. There are several approaches to decision making which offer insight into the process by which managers arrive at their decisions. Typically, the following 4 types that approach to decision making within an organizational settings. Firstly is the rational approach. There are 8 steps in this time. Firstly, number 1, state the situational goals. Number 2, identify the problem. Number 3, determining decision time. Number 4, generate alternatives. Number 5, evaluate alternatives. Number 6, choose an alternative. Number 7, implementing the plan. And finally is control. Next is the behavioral approach. This approach assumes that decision makers operate with both rationality and rationality rather than with the perfect rationality assumed by the rational approach. Bounded rationality is the idea that decision maker cannot deal with all the information about one aspect and alternatives pertaining to a problem. There are 3 the features of this. Firstly, use of procedures and rules of thumb which reduce uncertainty in decision making initially. Next is sub-optimizing is a way of seeking the best, and finally is satisfying refers to examining alternative only until a solution that meets minimal requirements is found. Next is the practical approach. This approach combines the steps of the rational approach with the worldwide features and conditions in the behavioral approach to create a more realistic process for making decisions. According to this approach, rather than generalize on alternative decisions, making should try to go beyond rules of thumb and certify limitation. Finally is the personal approach. A personal approach to decision making because it deals with the personal conflicts that people experience in particularly difficult decision situations. The model has five basic characteristics. Firstly, live decisions are decisions that commit an individual or institution to a certain course of action. Next is the recognize that procrastination and rationalization are a mechanism. Next is explicitly acknowledge that some decision could possibly go wrong. Fourth is if a particular course of action violates the decision maker's moral conviction, is unlikely to be selected. Finally, its major decision concerning one's life are either all decisions that require commitment to one specific alternative without allowing much compromise. And that's just my part.
A type of decisions. The first one is structural problems and program decisions. Program decisions are repeated decisions that can be handled by a routine approach. Therefore, the managers usually use them to solve the structural problems with a straightforward, familiar, and easily defined problem. For example, a student wants to rob a subject. The student management departments respond to the request based on deadline. There are three types of program decisions. The first is procedures, which is a series of sequential steps used to respond to a well-structured problem, which means when the problem is clear, the managers know how to make the decisions based on the procedures. The second is a rule, which is a clear statement that how managers what can or cannot be done. For example, the rules about lateness and absenteeism permit supervisors to make the disciplinary decisions fairly and rapidly. The last is a policies, which is a guideline for making decisions, and it also contain an ambitious term and require interpretation. For example, a policy statement from a store is customers always come first and should always be satisfied. The term satisfied is unclear and needs the interpretation. And the second one is unstructured problems and non-program decisions. Non-program decisions are unique and non-recurring and involve custom-made solutions. Therefore, they are used to solve the unstructured problem with a new, unusual, and difficult to recognize for which information is ambiguous or incomplete. For example, during COVID-19 pandemic, many cities have locked down and which affect many businesses. Therefore, the managers of all sectors need to make the decision to alleviate the capital loss of their company.
So hello everyone, my name is Sung, and today to continue with our group presentation, I will talk about the section of the conditions in decision making. So as you know, every day a manager has to make hundreds of decisions in the organization. There are different conditions in which decisions are made. Managers sometimes have an almost perfect understanding of conditions surrounding a decision, but sometimes in contrast. So that generally the decision maker makes decisions under the three main conditions, which are certainty, risk, and uncertainty. Now let's take a look at the characteristic of each. First, about certainty. Certainty is an ideal situation for making decisions where a manager can make accurate decisions because all outcomes are known. For example, bank uh, bank interests are made known to clients, so it is easier for business managers to decide on the problem of where to deposit their company's funds. The bank which offers the highest interest rate, therefore, is the obvious choice of the manager when asked to make a decision. Second, a a far more common situation is risk, conditions in which the decision maker is able to estimate the likelihood of certain outcomes. Under risk, managers have historical data from past personal experiences or secondary information that lets them assign probabilities to different alternatives. And last, imagine that what will happen if you face a decision where you are not certain about the outcomes and cannot even make reasonable estimates. We call this condition is uncertainty, which means that a decision maker has neither certainty nor the reasonable probability estimate available. So an optimistic manager will follow a maximus choice, which means maximizing the maximum possible payoff, while a pessimist will follow a mean choice, which means that maximizing the minimum possible payoff. So thank you for your listening. Now my teammate will continue with her part.
So I will continue my friend's presentations with LO 1.4, which is the decisions making bias and errors. So the first, we have the heuristics are the rules of thumb. This rule can be held to make sense of complex, uncertain, or ambiguous information. However, they can also lead to errors and biases in processing and then evaluating the information. So next, we have the chart of the decision-making errors and biases. So after evaluating and analyzed this chart, we came to the conclusion that the chart could be divided into three categories: the lack of receiving other opinions, which is the immediate gratification bias, and the availability bias. The second is the personal bias on the manager's perspective, which is the overconfident bias. The anchoring effect, the selective perspection bias, the confirmation bias, hindsight bias. And the third category is a lack of awareness of the hidden dangers, which is the framing bias, the randomness bias, self-serving bias, and sunk cost errors. So that is when our group came to the conclusion and also the solution. So the first, the manager should enlist trusted individuals to have to identify weaknesses in decision-making style and work to improve the weaknesses. The second is they should identify the experiences commonly used and critically evaluate the relevance of those experiences. And third, the managers should pay attention to how the process of decision-making to avoid the errors and also the bias in the decision-making process. Now I will transfer this presentation to my next friend.
Now is the next part. As we all know that today's business world revolves around making decisions, often a risky one. So to make a good business decision, it is not easy. That's why I will introduce you guys an effective decision making in today's world. It contains three main parts. So the first part is the guidelines for making effective decisions. Firstly, you have to understand the cultural differences. Next is create standards for good decision making and know when it's time to quit. Importantly, you have to use an effective decision-making process. And last is to develop your ability to think clearly. So how do we know is when it is an effective decision-making process? So here are some characteristics of an effective decision-making process. The first one, it always have to focus on what is important. And it also has to be logical and consistent too. It requires only adequate information to resolve a particular dilemma as well as encourage the gathering of relevant information. An effective decision-making process also acknowledges subjective and objective thinking, blends analytical with intuitive thinking. Lastly, it must be straightforward, reliable, easy to use, and the most important thing, flexible. So, what element does affect to the decision making? The first one must be design thinking. Design thinking is somehow like approaching management problems as designer approach design problems. Also, we can see that another element affecting decision making is the big data. The big data is the vast amount of quantifiable data that can be analyzed by highly sophisticated processes.